The incredible faith of Abraham, the father of faith. Opening hook, 10-15 seconds. What would you do if God asked you to leave everything you knew, your home, your country, your family, and go to a place you had never seen before? No map, no clear destination, only a promise. This is the story of a man who trusted God so deeply that his faith changed the course of history, a man known today as the father of faith. This is the story of Abraham, the beginning of Abraham's journey. Long ago, in the ancient city of Ur, there lived a man named Abram, who would later be called Abraham. Ur was a wealthy and powerful city in Mesopotamia. People worshipped many idols and false gods, but one day, the true God spoke to Abram. God gave Abram an astonishing command. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. God also made an incredible promise. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, and through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Imagine hearing those words. Abram had no details, only a promise. Yet Abram did something extraordinary. He believed God. At 75 years old, Abram packed up everything, his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, servants, and livestock, and began a journey toward an unknown land. This simple act of obedience would begin one of the most powerful faith stories in the Bible. God's promise of a great nation. Abram eventually arrived in the land of Canaan, the land God had promised him. But there was a problem. God had promised Abram that he would become a great nation, yet Abram and Sarai had no children. Years passed, then more years. Still no child. One night God spoke to Abram again and took him outside. Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be. The stars filled the sky beyond number. God was promising Abram that his descendants would be just as countless. And here is something remarkable. The Bible says Abram believed the Lord, and God counted his faith as righteousness. Abram trusted God, even when the promise seemed impossible. The covenant and a new name. When Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him again and made a covenant with him. God said, "You will be the father of many nations." Then God changed Abram's name to Abraham, which means father of many nations. God also changed Sarai's name to Sarah. And God made a promise that sounded almost unbelievable. Sarah, who was 90 years old, would give birth to a son. At first, Abraham laughed. It seemed impossible. But God asked an important question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? The birth of Isaac. A year later, something miraculous happened. Just as God had promised, Sarah gave birth to a son. They named him Isaac, which means laughter. The impossible had become possible. After decades of waiting, Abraham finally held the son God had promised. Isaac was not just a child, he was the fulfillment of God's promise. Through Isaac, Abraham's descendants would grow into a great nation. Abraham was now over 100 years old, yet the story of his faith was not finished. The greatest test of faith. One day, God tested Abraham in a way that would become one of the most dramatic moments in the entire Bible. God said to him, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Imagine how difficult that command must have been. Isaac was the promised son, the miracle child. Yet Abraham did not argue. Early the next morning, he set out with Isaac and 2 servants for the mountain God had shown him. After 3 days of traveling, they reached the place. Abraham told the servants to stay behind. Then he and Isaac walked up the mountain together. Isaac carried the wood for the offering. But Isaac noticed something was missing. "Father," Isaac said, "we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham answered with powerful faith, "God himself will provide the lamb." God provides. When they reached the top of the mountain, Abraham built an altar and placed the wood on it. Then, with a heavy heart but unwavering trust in God, he bound Isaac and laid him on the altar. As Abraham lifted the knife, ready to obey God completely, suddenly a voice from heaven called out, "Abraham, Abraham." "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the angel said. "Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son from me." At that moment, Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a bush by its horns. God had provided a sacrifice. The ram was offered instead of Isaac. And Abraham named that place, "The Lord will provide." This moment became a powerful symbol of faith and obedience. God's promise confirmed. After this incredible test, God reaffirmed his promise to Abraham. God said that Abraham's descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And through Abraham's family, all nations on earth would be blessed. Generations later, that promise would ultimately be fulfilled through Jesus Christ, who came from Abraham's lineage. The legacy of Abraham. Abraham lived a long life, full of faith and trust in God. He did not see all of God's promises fulfilled during his lifetime, but he believed that God was faithful. Today, Abraham is honored as the father of faith by millions of people around the world. His story is central to the faith of Christians, Jews, and Muslims. But more importantly, Abraham's life teaches us powerful lessons about trusting God. Lessons we can learn from Abraham. Abraham's story reminds us of several important truths. First, faith often requires stepping into the unknown. When Abraham left his homeland, he had no idea where God would lead him, yet he trusted God's direction. Second, God's timing is not our timing. Abraham waited decades for the promised son, but God's promise came exactly when the time was right. Third, God can do the impossible. A 90-year-old woman having a child seems impossible, but nothing is too hard for God. And finally, true faith trusts God even in the hardest moments. Abraham trusted God with what mattered most to him. That is the kind of faith that transforms lives. Closing. Abraham's journey began with a single step of faith. One decision to trust God changed the future of nations. And his story continues to inspire people thousands of years later. So the question remains for us today. When God calls us to trust him, will we have the faith of Abraham?